We're looking at chapters 33 to 35 of The Handmaid's Tale. It's Mrs. Bart here with a lesson on Gilead and human relationships. For today's lesson, you will need your copy of The Handmaid's Tale and any notes that you have if they're in a different place, a writing pen, an annotation pen, and whatever you choose to write on, whether that's paper or an exercise book. Today's learning objectives are to consider the theonomy of Gilead and its totalitarianism. That's an AO1 objective. And we're going to explore how Atwood presents feminism as being disrupted by Gilead, with particular attention to her authorial methods. If you need to gather any of the equipment, press pause and unpause when you're organised. And here's a reminder to turn off the notifications on your phone so that you can fully concentrate on the learning this lesson. So the question today that we're going to explore is, how does Atwood present Gilead's power over human relationships? Power being one of the major themes in this novel. And we're focusing on chapters 32 to 35. You'll do now is to paraphrase the commander's statement from chapter 32, which you'll find on page 223. The short quotation reads, "The problem wasn't only with the women," he says. "The main problem was with the men. There was nothing for them anymore." I'll remind you, as a misconception alert, that a paraphrase is different from a summary. A paraphrase is a restatement of the sentences in simpler and clarified terms that still capture as much of the explicit meaning, but also as much of the connotation as possible. You have some time to do this, but I'd like you to have a go at the challenge as well. On page 224, we see Offred refraining to give her opinion. Why do you think Offred refrains from giving her opinion on page 224? Press pause to do the do now and play when you're ready to move on. We're now focusing on chapter 33, PRAYVAGANZA. If prayer is an act of communicating with God, and extravaganza is an elaborate and spectacular entertainment or production, what could Atwood's portmanteau mean in the context of a theonomy? A portmanteau, if you remember, is a word that's kind of made up of two other words. Atwood writes, "Below the red writing, there's a line of smaller print in black with the outline of a winged eye on either side of it. God is a national resource." You'll find that quotation on page 227. What does this sentence tell us about the relationship between church and state in Gilead? And here's another challenge for you. What do you make of the image of a winged eye? Press pause to answer these questions and unpause when you're ready to move on. How did you get on? The word PRAYVAGANZA emphasises that in the totalitarian state of Gilead, prayer serves a public state function. Remember, the church and state, far from being separated, as they are in our current society, make up one entity in Gilead. Prayer is no longer an individual expression of faith. It's a public event, and it's an act of patriotic fervour. What did you make of the second question, analysing that quotation? The banner that hangs over the PRAYVAGANZA sums up this new church-state relationship. It reads, God is a national resource. Because Gilead was formed in response to the crisis caused by dramatically decreased birth rates, the state's entire structure, with its religious trappings and rigid political hierarchy, is built around one single goal: control of reproduction. The state tackles the problem head-on by assuming complete control of women's bodies through their political subjugation. Women cannot vote, hold property or jobs. They can't read or do anything else that might allow them to become subversive or even independent, and thereby undermine their husbands or the state. What did you make of the image of the winged eye? We have the eyes, don't we, in *Handmaid's Tale, to remind us that this totalitarian state is also a surveillance state, in that everybody is being watched. Wings might suggest some sort of spiritual presence. It might also remind us about the angels whose job it is to do this surveillance. We're now going to focus on chapter 34. What did we overlook? Here are some tasks for you to do. First of all, I'd like you to summarise the commander's explanation of marriage in the old order, which is actually reflective of our current society. You'll find that on page 233. Next, explain the comparison that Atwood draws between the handmaids and nuns. How do these customary holy women subvert the totalitarian state of Gilead? You'll find that on page 234. And then thinking about chapter 34 as a whole, what do you notice about the narrative structure of chapter 34? Trace the sequencing of ideas carefully. If you like, you can make a flowchart to do that. Where and why does Atwood suggest ideas about how Gilead has reframed human relationships? Take your time with those 3 tasks. Press pause and unpause when you're ready for the discussion. What did we overlook is a question that the commander asks Offred on page 233 after he gives his critique, if you like, of the old order. You know, when the commander justifies the marriage process in Gilead, he offers a compelling critique of the old order, which is a compelling critique, consequently, of our current society. Again, he's using feminist rhetoric, and he makes several valid points. Society should not force women to spend their entire wages on childcare. It should value the work of mothering. It should not allow fathers to run off and abandon children and families. It should not allow domestic abuse. These are all things that are failings of the current society, and in Gilead, none of these conditions officially exist. Let's have a look at the second task, explaining the comparison that Atwood draws between the handmaids and nuns. Well, Atwood draws a parallel between the nuns forced to become handmaids and the handmaids themselves. In fact, if you think about it, the handmaids do look a bit like nuns in the way that they dress, and both these groups are separated from society. They're both consecrated, that's given over to a sort of holy work, to a kind of religious duty, and actually both are required to wear long garments that are called habits. But becoming a nun is a choice, of course, and nuns vow to remain celibate and to serve God by ignoring their fertility and their sexual urges. But handmaids are forced into a sole religious and social duty to reproduce. I mean, according to the worldview of Gilead, nuns actually pose a greater threat to the totalitarian order than divorced women or women who have premarital sex. The women in those groups are simply behaving, according to Gilead, immorally. But the nuns pose a huge threat because they're taking themselves out of the sexual world entirely. And since Gilead is built on social control, the adoption of a celibate life is even more, it's the sort of ultimate rejection of this totalitarian order that's based on reproductive ideals. The third task asks you to think about the structure of chapter 34 as a whole and trace and sequence ideas carefully. Offred, in answer to the commander's question, what did we overlook, answers very simply at the bottom of page 233. Love, I said. Even though the commander's critique of the old order is compelling, even to feminists, still Offred negates the commander's argument by pointing out the universal importance of love. She's pointing out that this regime in Gilead, while it does remove some uncertainty and unhappiness for women, it leaves out the possibility of freedom to pursue love. Arranged marriages are by definition the opposite of free choice. Romance, although a very unstable idea, is an expression of the soul's liberty and the human joy of choosing who you will love. The commander comments in chapter 32 that men could not feel before Gilead. But it seems that for Offred, in her response, Gilead erases the ability to feel. In depriving her and other women of the opportunity to be in love, Gilead has effectively amputated their ability to feel. So there are no longer real husband-wife relationships. If you were thinking about the narrative structure of chapter 34, I'm just going to add this. You will see that something that we've looked at before as an authorial method of Atwood's, which is this disruption of the linear narrative, this moving back and forth to present time, flashbacks, further flashbacks, ones that cover recent history, ones that cover more distant history, more distant past events, and all connected by Offred's organic thought processes. Chapter 34 begins in the PRAYVAGANZA. Very quickly, Offred remembers something that Moira used to say, because they're singing a hymn on page 232, there is a balm in Gilead, and she remembers that Moira used to say there is a bomb in Gilead. So that's an interesting play on words there, balm being a healing ointment, which is the original word from the hymn, and you all know what a bomb is. It's an explosive and destructive device. From the PRAYVAGANZA and the arranged marriages between the angels and some very young girls, Offred goes back to a past conversation that she was having with the commander. From there, it moves to a previous time, probably in the red centre, where a lot of Fred's flashbacks come from, where Aunt Lydia talks about love as well. Love, said Aunt Lydia. This is on page 234 with distaste. Don't let me catch you at it. No mooning and tuning around here, girls. Wagging her finger at us. Love is not the point. Then a very short paragraph straight after that, back into the commander's office, and then back to the PRAYVAGANZA again. Over pages 234 and 235, the PRAYVAGANZA continues, and then we have another flashback, this time to the red centre again. On page 236. What we're aiming for, says Aunt Lydia, is a spirit of camaraderie among women. And then back towards the end of the chapter, the PRAYVAGANZA continues, and Ofglen whispers to Offred that we, and we don't know who she means by we, but we know that you have been seeing the commander alone, and she leaves her with a mission to find out anything that she can from those visits. So, as we know, Atwood likes to use these disrupted linear narratives, these non-chronological flashbacks, and movement within flashbacks as well, to link events in Offred's life with what's currently happening, so that this PRAYVAGANZA, where there are multiple wedding ceremonies going on, it's a mass wedding, which we've often associated actually in sociology with cults, makes her think of the discussions that she has been having in the recent past with the commander about love, and how love has been eradicated from Gilead as something too unstable to ensure a productive, well-populated society. And then that takes her back to the Red Centre and her training as a handmaid, where Aunt Lydia is reinforcing those ideals, actually introducing the new handmaids to this idea that love doesn't exist in Gilead, and all the relationships that stem from choices we make about love have also then been eradicated and reframed according to societal needs. Okay, we're now going to look at chapter 35, and I'm picking up a word actually that appears very early on page 238 of chapter 35, this idea of being invalidated. I'll just read the first paragraph to you. Now there's a space to be filled in the too warm air of my room, and a time also, a space-time, between here and now, and there and then, punctuated by dinner. The arrival of the tray, carried up the stairs, as if for an invalid. An invalid, one who has been invalidated. No valid passport, no exit. Got some more questions for you to do. I'd like you to look carefully at some paragraphs within this chapter, about halfway through page 239, where the commander says, or we have love, said the commander, up to about 241. How does Atwood present Offred's thought patterns about love? Let's see if you can track them in a similar way that I've just done for you for chapter 34. When you've done that, I'd like you to select what you think is evidence that's worthy of analysis to show how Atwood is exploiting association of ideas in her use of language. What might this toying around with language that we've come to understand as a important method, authorial method of Atwood's, what does this toying around with language suggest in your choice of evidence? And lastly, right at the end of the chapter, when Serena presents the photo of her daughter, Offred states, "You can see it in her eyes. I am not there." What role has Gilead played in altering human relationships, both past and present? So as you can see with that photo, the idea of familial relationships comes in as well. Press pause, take your time with these questions, and unpause when you're ready to move on with the discussion. How did you get on looking at chapter 35? After the PRAYVAGANZA, Offred reminisces about how love actually felt. And she's overwhelmed by a wave of intense emotion. This has happened before, often in the night chapters. As in the night chapters, where she has time, she can only cling to her memories of Luke and what loving him felt like. She reflects that the next generation will never have this quintessential human experience of feeling love. This is actually a chilling thought. It affirms Aunt Lydia's sinister comment that Gilead will eventually, quote, become ordinary. If you think about that idea, you see that Atwood is suggesting through Aunt Lydia's speech that this closing of the horizon is the dark power of a totalitarian society. Once people cannot imagine anything other than oppression, oppression becomes ordinary. And we saw very, very early on in the book, Offred feeling an intense fear that she would forget how things feel, and that was coupled with almost a horror that she had already assimilated some of the values, the cultural values of Gilead, if you remember how she viewed the Japanese tourists. For your plenary task, I'd like us to go back to the question that we paused at the beginning. How does Atwood present Gilead's power over human relationships? I'd like you to begin with a beautiful claim and substantial evidence that's worthy of analysis that I want you to support with that claim, but I would also like you to present a wide range of textual evidence throughout your analysis. I'd like you to develop your analysis into a literary analysis of Atwood's authorial method, and then you're going to stop short there. As you know now, that would not be considered a complete main body paragraph. It would normally have to go on into an AO3, AO4 or AO5 commentary, but I'd like us to just focus on AO1 and AO2 for the time being. And I'd like you to submit that according to the dates and instructions on Show My Homework. I hope you've enjoyed getting back into The Handmaid's Tale. We are going to be linking this all together with our recent work on Streetcar. And as usual, I will of course enjoy reading your plenary paragraphs and giving you some feedback on how they're going. Thank you for your focus today.